Good afternoon. Thank you so much to everyone that logged on and will still log on for meeting us here. Especially thank you very much to all the Maverick Insiders. You must always know that you guys are very special to us at Daily Maverick. I'm here today with Ebbe Dommisse, the author of a fascinating book about Afrikaner tycoons, which focuses on how they made their money. So it will be in store now, and it's an Afrikaans version and there's an English version, and it's really a deep dive and a proper, almost historical account of the household names that we got to know in the past few decades. People related to R&B, Capitec, Sanlam, the largest corporations in South Africa, and then obviously some other mega farmers. Ebbe, I'm very happy to have you here. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you very much.
So Ebbe was a pupil at Paul Boys High. He studied at Stellenbosch. He studied further at the University of Columbia, and he also did a PhD on Sir David de Villiers Graaf at Stellenbosch. He wrote the Johann Rupert biography, and he also worked at Die Burger, which was the first Afrikaans newspaper. He was a founding member of Beeld, where I worked for 6 years, but that was way after Ebbe started and initiated that paper. So we are here to discuss, Ebbe, this fruit of 3 years' work, Fortunes, the Rise and Rise of the Afrikaner Tycoons. Yeah. Now, we discussed this quickly beforehand, but you saw some of these tycoons grew up before your eyes. You're slightly older than some of them, and some of them are your peers, some of them are obviously much younger. You witnessed their dealings, and you witnessed how they made their ever-growing wealth. You also witnessed the worst of apartheid. You witnessed its decline, the advent of democracy, the best and the worst of that too. And this strikes me as a complete focus, a deep dive into the wealth of a selection of Afrikaners and how they made it. What message did you wish to convey with this book?
I think the most important message is that these were people who, it started way back among Afrikaners that it's fruitless to depend on other people to make your value and your wealth. And these people mostly went to stand on their own feet, entrepreneurs especially. And some were, there's a constant story that they were aided by the state, which is not really true. I think if you look back in history, especially after the Great Depression of 1930, there was a very constant, what shall we call it, bewustzijn, thinking that Afrikaners should not depend on others. They should start their own businesses and so on, which they did. And this was carried on especially after 1994, by these tycoons. Some of them made lots and lots of money, but they also expanded internationally. And this is where they came from.
Well, we will dive into that account and question some of it. There are phenomenal insight into these people specifically that you chose to write about. It seems like solid research, and it's almost it can stand almost as an historical account. How did you get your access? Did you study with some of these people? Are you friends with them? They're notoriously closed up and clammy towards journalists, so it must be commended that you could get access to these people.
Yes, I think the fact that I wrote the Rupert biography assisted me. That's originally why Jonathan Ball asked me to write this book. He read an article about Boere billionaires, and he thought there was a book in it, and he approached me. And I said, well, I was a bit hesitant, it's a very demanding job. And in the end, I said, okay, I'll go on with it. And I started writing emails to people, phoning some and so on. I did know some of them earlier on. Most I did not know. But I think the fact that I wrote the Rupert biography helped me, and most of them were very open to me. They replied either in a man-to-man interview, or they replied to emails. And most of them were, gave me a lot of information which I think was not available readily. And your question was whether they were open. Yes, they were. Yeah, except one, and that was Markus Jooste. Yeah, refused flat out to speak to me, and that was about 8 months before the crash of Steinhoff. So I suppose one can understand why he did not want to speak to me. He knew already what was coming.
Yeah, probably, right? Yeah. So you make the case that the democratic years were particularly kind to Afrikaner business people. And when you look at, for example, the account of Mgileru, who founded Capitec on the backs of millions of unbanked people, there might be a case for that. Tell us about Mgileru and those interesting things that you found out about him.
Yes, I think I would not fully agree that it was particularly kind to Afrikaner people. I think it happened despite all the social engineering, under the new government, affirmative action, BEE, and all that. It was really firstly that they had to stand on their own feet, do their own thing. Secondly, technology played a very important part of the development of the economy. And they exploited that, especially the farmers. I don't think the farmers would have been able to become mega farmers, for which the term entrepreneurs is used, if the technology didn't advance as it did. Nowadays, you farm on scale with the aid of technology, and it's really the future of farming everywhere in the world. Secondly, for the businessmen, what did happen to them was also South Africa opened up to the world and to Africa. And people like Christo, Wiese and Whitey Basson went into a big way into Africa. Mgileru went into an unheard of market, the poor. And it was really, if you look at the whole history, it was Jannie Maton who started that. But he was a bit hesitant of continuing with it because he was regarded as the biggest loan shark in South Africa. And then Mgileru took over. He had a look at what was happening. He found it very interesting that these people were they did not have a lot of money, but they wanted savings accounts, bank accounts, and so on. And I think probably more than democracy, the technology helped him along. Every Capitec client has a bank card, a credit card, and so on. And they spread throughout South Africa. He has I think last time I counted 700 or 800 branches. And that's how the poor got into the banks. For the first time in a very, very big way, although it happened before with some of the mainstream banks, but they didn't have that amount of clients. Capitec now probably has the biggest client base in the country.
Indeed, and they were, of course, the old Bantustan banks, but this was really a new venture, and it worked quite well. Capitec, to this day, it is quite a coveted share. And these were the ideas and the concepts that you share in your book from the Tycoons. They were revolutionary concepts, and they were also very simple, like banking the poor, banking the unbanked. Yes. But these people were often also quite well positioned thanks to apartheid. I mean, G.T. Ferrara and Laurie de Pinaar, they initiated their businesses and they learned their lessons in the latter part of apartheid. And with the advent of democracy, they were well positioned to grow their wealth and to really go big. Would you see that is a sort of a theme right through the Tycoons that you describe here?
Well, all of them. Once you go into the stock exchange, that's where the real money is made with the growth of share prices. And in a way, if you look back at the apartheid years, there were black businessmen, and it's I think Patrice Motsepe refers to them, who really made a big success, like Sam Otsinyani, Habakuk Shukani, and Richard Maponya. They were big businessmen during the apartheid years, and despite apartheid, and G.T. Ferreira and Laurie Dippenaar and them, they entered the market actually before apartheid was ended. And they got a bank license. Bank licenses were quite scarce. They were lucky to get one because Johann Rupert gave up RMB, Rand Merchant Bank, in order to join his father's firm. And then they continued in the beginning, getting contracts from municipalities and so on. And but they built on and on, and First Rand is probably the biggest financial group in the country today.
Mm-hmm. I want to remind our listeners that they can ask questions of Ebbe. On the right side of your screen, there's a chat section. So all questions are welcome, and we will try to field as much as we can. Ebbe, there are 4 themes specifically that I would want to chat about. And the first would be that interesting tussle between the English and the Afrikaners that we described. But before we go to that, the history books are full of, either an English historian describing lazy Afrikaners who were stupid, who didn't have education, who couldn't make it in life, and you make also the case that the Afrikaner historians were more on the ground, that they had a different view, and often a view more based on facts, which described that the Afrikaners didn't have the chance to go study, and that they weren't stupid or lazy, but that it all mattered, or it all came down to the ability to compete and the ability to grow their wealth. Would you want to elaborate on that?
Well, I quote a journalist who makes more or less that kind of point, that they were very poor, backward, etc., which, if you really study the records, and there's a big discrepancy there, because remember, they rely basically for the first few hundred years since Johann van Rupert. Of course, what you hear nowadays is that all the trouble was started by Johann van Riebeeck. That's where all the trouble came from in South Africa. Now, that's very debatable. But if you look back at what happened during those times, I think the English historians were just not really going into the only written language in South Africa for about 150 years was Dutch, Netherlands. And these sources are not used to a big degree by English historians and liberal historians and so on. And the Afrikaners were not that backward. They had books, works of art, etc., and they started the Cape Dutch style in buildings, houses, and so on. So that's very debatable what some English historians write about that time. But I think the real turning point for a lot of Afrikaners was the Anglo-Boer War, which devastated farms in a big way. You should know about it. The Free State was what did they call it? Scorched earth. Cattle killed, the concentration camps and so on. And afterwards, these newly poor had to move to the cities, which was a very strange environment for them, and they weren't qualified for that. So then these Reddingsdaad people started, with the Afrikaners, especially in education. Education was always very, very important for Afrikaners. And also, I think one thing that's forgotten is that the previous government started universities, Afrikaans universities, which really empowered and enabled Afrikaners to stand on their own in business. And that's people like Anton Rupert and Albert Wessels. They were pioneers of field. And they really thought that they should compete with the English. There would be only respect for them if they could stand on their own feet and show that they were successful in business.
It does sound quite a lot like what's happening at the moment. There's a view that the Afrikaners are educated and are good business people, and that the broader part of the population is lazy and don't do work and are uneducated. But it sounds much like what the Afrikaners had to endure way back. And we will see later in the discussion how laws were initiated in South Africa to rob people of education often and rob people of their land. So there's obviously a bigger context through many decades to the history and then obviously the business chances that one gets to create wealth.
Yeah.
But you further mention and something related to that and how the politics of the matter plays into wealth and the creation of wealth is that you mention no Afrikaans speaking colored people are these mega tycoons in South Africa. They have leadership positions and scholarly and professional fields, but they're not the Markus Jooste, thank goodness for that, but they're not the Markus Jooste or the GT Ferrara or the Wesselse of the world. And then there's also no real female tycoons. Why would you think is that? Female Afrikaner tycoons and female Afrikaner colored tycoons.
Yes, the colours show very much the same pattern as the Afrikaners. The coloured people went into the professions, ministers of religion, teachers, civil service, and so on. But I couldn't find any super rich among them, although I looked. About women, I mentioned, I think before that, the daughter of Albert Wessels, Elizabeth Bradley, she was super rich, but that was money that was inherited mostly.
It was inherited money, not self-made.
Not self-made, no. Among the colored people and Afrikaans women, are not that I know of any super rich. Maybe thanks to hubby and so on, they have money, but there's among English-speaking people, there are women that are very rich, yeah, but not as far as I could see any among the Afrikaner people. Also, what I should mention, of course, is that there's today also very much a feeling among some black people that they should depend on the state, and that does not encourage entrepreneurs to stand on their own feet, because we do have role models among black people, like I mentioned before, Richard Mokonya, who decided that he should do his own thing. There is also, I read a very interesting article by Intingi in the Business Day a few days ago that he said, but there should be a rethink among black business people. We should really not try to enter white businesses all the time, but begin to do our own thing, stand on our own feet.
I do get the sense that the underlying theme is obviously the chance to grow wealth and the chance to start a business. It wasn't fashionable for women in the apartheid years especially to initiate their own businesses. They should have been at home taking care of kids and cooking.
Yeah.
Colored people the same. It wasn't allowed to initiate or to participate actually in large businesses and to grow your wealth. I mean, Richard Maponyef and the Motsepes, for all their supposed wealth in the apartheid years, they weren't millionaires back then, were they?
Oh, some were, yeah. I should think so. Richard Maponyef would surely qualify. The other thing is, of course, that, the entrepreneur skills that are needed where you do find it is in townships. If you look around, these small businesses, all kinds of very interesting things happening, like people starting bicycle delivery services and so on, selling fruit, vegetables, etc. There's quite a lot going on about. The informal economy in South Africa seems to be very strong compared to the formal economy, which is losing jobs all the time.
I think Tulile Zaki has a very interesting series of questions, which I don't think there are easy answers to. You would want to ask, for example, the compounded wealth of the prominent Afrikaans corporations on the current economy numbers since they joined the stock exchange. I don't know. I think one should go and crunch the numbers for that. You don't have that offhand, do you?
No, I don't have that offhand, no.
Do we know how many of them are listed in international exchanges?
Of the big companies, surely, yeah, Richemont, Naspers Process, Anglo-American, no, that's not an Afrikaans one.
Remgro as well.
Yeah, Remgro is not really international. Richemont is. Mediclinic might be international. But if you think further, Sanlam is operating internationally, but listed here. And so, of course, Pepko, ex-Wiese, and Shoprite, ex-Whitey Basson. So there are some, yes. Spain is an important one with his insurance business in Britain. Last time I looked, he owned about 40% of the insurance market in Britain, which makes him a very, very wealthy man. And he, of course, he lives in Steyn City, which he started next to Johannesburg.
Paul Barnard has a question that I am very interested in as well. He asks, how many of the super rich mentioned in your book have established significant philanthropic foundations?
Quite a few.
Can you mention three?
Well, number one is, I would say, is Mgilaru, who funds Amabungani, of course, which you would know about. The Ruperts, yes, they have foundations, quite a few, 5 in fact. Francois van Niekerk, who was regarded as the biggest philanthropist in Africa, there's 3. There's a whole chapter in the book about the country of givers, which shows that South Africans, after Americans, are the biggest philanthropists and people spending money on good causes and so on in the world.
Okay. The third theme that I want to touch on is that you often describe all these men, Koos Bekker, Mgilaru, Anton Rupert, Johann Rupert, you describe them as exceptionally smart, they're very hardworking, and you have often now said they had to stand on their own 2 feet. But nowhere I find that you kind of lead the reader into that they were also really, really lucky and on the right side of a government that assisted them, maybe not per person, but in general. The competition was more than halved by laws initiated to keep people out of the economy. They initiated laws like the 1913 Land Act. These laws were initiated to benefit white people, and there were tussles between the Afrikaner and the English. But I think, if the Afrikaner couldn't make a success from businesses, they were pretty useful or useless in a time where the competition weren't so strong. Would you agree with that?
Not really, because the English from the beginning had a huge advantage. I think I make the point that, Afrikaners were quite poor after the Anglo-Boer War. But on the other hand, the know-how and the knowledge that the English brought to South Africa, that I make the point specifically, that had the effect that South Africa didn't become a country that was nationalized, industries nationalized, and so on, and also falling backward, like so many other former colonies, which you can see next door to us. Zimbabwe is a prime example. So Afrikaners had to compete against tremendous odds again. I mean, Johann Rupert, when he started out with his tobacco, I mean, he had maybe 5% of the market. The market was dominated by English. He had to be very inventive and smart to capture the market, which he did in the end. And I mean, you can mention many more. In retail, Afrikaners were quite bad until Renier van Rooyen, the real founder of Pepko and Shoprite. He originated it. I mean, he started from Uppington and Kennard and places like that, and he made a huge success of it. And he had tremendous success against very established English concerns.
Okay.
So it's not, if you want to speak about the land question, that of course was a tremendous setback for black entrepreneurs. And sure, the land question remains a very hot issue in South Africa, and especially because they didn't get title, those that were where the land was taken away. You know, if South Africa had title deeds today, huge townships would have value for money in the land that they possess in the townships. I think this point was repeatedly made by De Soto from Peru, and it's not happening in South Africa. Land is being given to black farmers now, and they have to wait 30 years to get title of the land. That does not create wealth. That creates further dependency.
Yeah, look, I think to describe the Land Acts as a setback is quite polite.
Yes.
I want to ask about, you go extensively across various chapters about the Dutch East India Company and the influence thereof on the country. You speak about the Anglo-Boer War and often about the Great Depression, and then, of course, about the arm blanke vraagstuk, that question about the very poor whites who were often Afrikaners, and then how the state initiated certain measures like Sanlam and Santam in 1918, Volkskas and the universities to address...
Not by the state. Sanlam, etc., weren't created by the state.
Yes, by business people and the state. Yes. So you describe that quite well, and you mentioned many of the tycoons as being part of those initiating businesses like Sanlam and Santam and the banks. But you don't necessarily go into the Bantustan laws, the education laws, and again the Land Act laws. Are there a reason for that? That you sort of went past that context?
No, there's no real reason for it. I looked at basically, if you look at that part of history, Afrikaners were at a disadvantage, and I think very much could apply to what is happening to black business people today. They are definitely at a disadvantage, and you could carry that argument further, and maybe one should, but. The book is about 400 pages, so not go much further than that. Yeah,
that is indeed.
I concentrate on the individuals and part of the history, but you're perfectly correct. The Land Act was it's probably, you could say, it was a disaster for black people as far as possessing land was concerned. Yes, I would agree with that.
Maybe then we can view this. This very well-researched book as a thin slice out of a big South African cake, where it's a deep dive into certain context that made the South African Afrikaner tycoons. What about the world influence and the world politics? Are there interesting stories that you unearthed relating to that influence?
I think the big thing is technology, the advance of technology, and I have a whole chapter about Rudolf Buerta in Silicon Valley. He's one of the top people of Sequoia Capital. He's a billionaire in his own right in dollars, and in this chapter, he's very, very good about what was happening in technology and why he went to Stanford University and then started PayPal. He was a member of the so-called PayPal mafia, and he was appointed there by none other than Elon Musk. So this is the new world we're moving into. And as we're talking now, I mean, this would have been impossible, 10 years ago?
Yeah.
And so, yes, the international picture is changing drastically and will still be changing. And technology is the buzzword at the moment, and it's changing international relations. I mean, China is on the up, also military, unfortunately, and really making itself felt in the world. Yeah, you can look at the international picture of what's happening to China, Russia, India, and there's a new world coming, and it might also have some severe problems. I mean, China is trying to be very dominant in all kinds of fields, sending spaceships into the air now, and advanced technology as far as technology is concerned. So there is international trends that South Africa should watch closely, and in that sense, our education system is lacking, and we are also suffering from a brain drain. Some of our best talents are going overseas. That should be a huge concern to the government. How on earth they could cut research in South Africa by 90% is beyond me. I mean, if you talk about an African renaissance, you cut research, there must be something wrong with the thinking on the highest level.
Before we move on from this theme, I think Godfrey Tekisa has a very interesting question. What would, in your mind, be the common thread of business acumen that could be learned from the tycoons that you interviewed and that you researched and wrote about?
The common theme, I suppose, is to look for opportunities. Most of these tycoons looked at the market, found a niche, and then start exploiting it as much as they can. But it's all, they're not alone. They have good people along them. You look for good partners. I think Johann Rupert was really a pioneer as far as partnerships was concerned. And his whole philosophy of partnership, I found fascinating, actually, because in looking for partners, he also had this philosophy, which still resounds today, that you cannot sleep easily if your neighbor is poor and can't eat.
Wow. Yeah, indeed. Is there anyone specifically that you think our listeners can go and research and look further into that where we can glean specific lessons from, especially for young entrepreneurs? I can see from the questions there are several young people and people maybe my age wanting to initiate businesses or wanting to see where can they find a gap. What have you learned? How do you start a business? Just quickly, a 1 minute answer.
1 minute answer, that's really a long answer. I would look at Leroux starting Capitec. I would look at Rudolf Buerta going into technology. I would look in Koos Bekker starting outside the country in technology. And then as far as small business is concerned, Whitey, Basson and Christo, Wiese. They all have very valuable lessons for all kinds of entrepreneurs.
Thank you, Ebbe. I want to move on to the fourth theme. ZZ2 has always been very fascinating to me, and you deservedly so give a section to mega farmers in your book. Help us understand the ZZ2 situation, briefly about the history, but also about the current situation and where they're going. I think we can learn a lot from ZZ2, from their view of the world, the view of South Africa, and how they're helping, how they're actually doing things to help people in the country.
I should think so. ZZ2 is one of the examples of mega farmers. My son Jacques did the chapters on the mega farmers, and he calls them entrepreneurs because they go over such a vast range of what is needed for the community as well. It's not only food, and they farm on scale. They are big farmers. They were helped along by technology in a very big way. You know, one of the interesting stories that Jacques told was when he visited Klaver, the farmer at Balkly West, and he said his land was as flat as a rugby field, and the farmer said, "No, it's flatter," because he used laser beams to get the ground even. And this is the technology that enables farmers to farm 24 hours a day, tractors going for 24 hours. It would have been impossible before 1994. And all these mega farmers saw these opportunities due to technology. Not only farming, the distribution systems, flying produce overseas and all that, was very difficult before 1994. Then technology changed everything, and it will be the pattern of the future. And small farming will only be possible probably near big cities, because the urbanization of South Africa is proceeding rapidly. The rural areas are getting poorer. Actually, there won't be that many opportunities in rural areas.
And do you think it's a business that can have a few spin-offs? Are there gaps in that market where people can expand on and can add to, and can, are there more space in the agricultural sector for entrepreneurial South Africans?
I think for niche farming there would be. I would try, I think, in some instances to join some of the mega farmers, see if there's a niche that they would like you to farm. Especially farming in cities will also increase. In these big cities, you can farm vertically. In buildings, it's already happening in some big cities in the world.
Yeah. But Amsterdam, for example, have these amazing hydroponic upside farming, as you're saying. It is quite interesting.
Yeah. The Netherlands is a very interesting example of farming. I mean, they're one of the biggest exporters in Europe, but not only agricultural products, but tulips from Amsterdam.
Yes.
So you don't need that much land either to be a very successful farmer with this new technology.
That is my maybe a lesson that we should expand on and learn more of. Is the fact that you don't need necessarily land. There are other few resources that you can use, but it will remain expensive. It's not a cheap game. Right. Moving on, I want to ask you.
Add this to the land question. The big land question would be in the cities. People need land in the cities, and they need title deeds in order to have a successful career. You need land for city people. That's where the work is going to be.
Yeah, the title deed question is quite important. Yeah. Moving on from that, you wrote now about Johann Rupert and Basson and Dippenaar and the Ruperts, but who of them, and Bekker, of course, who of them are your favorite tycoons?
Well, the young one is Roelof Botha. I think he's a very interesting case study. Hendrik de Tooy is another one. Koos Bekker, Johann Rupert, all of them. I wouldn't pick
But you have to give reasons now. You can't just rattle off everyone in your book.
each one of them, Koos Bekker brought new technology to South Africa. I mean, he started Mnet here, and then he expanded. Johann Rupert in the luxury market, he expanded that. Marie Leroux starting Capitec. I mean, that was a marvelous initiative. And we also, Rudolf Buerta, you know, he's not coming back to South Africa, which is a huge pity. And that's the kind of people we need. And yeah.
Do you know why he doesn't want to come back to South Africa?
The business and the opportunities are not here. South Africa is really retrogressing in a way, you know, and I think the whole insistence that the state should create jobs. The state creates job opportunities, which is short term, but real jobs are being developed by private sector, and there is not enough. Not only lack of respect, but there's hostility towards the private sector, which is holding South Africa back as far as I'm concerned.
So all of these men, again, we spoke about now, they also have a colloquial name these days, white monopoly capital, which is obviously a term referred to or crafted by Bell Pottinger when the Guptas came into trouble with journalists, Pacific Daily Maverick and Amabungani, when we started writing about the Gupta leaks. They crafted this term of white monopoly capital, and then the politicians obviously ran with it. And to this day, very few people realize that it's a construct from an English firm. But so this white monopoly capital members, you know, Kevin Weir asks, is it a matter that distracts these tycoons into the political environment, or was it merely a concept designed under the initial state capture era that's now water under the bridge? So we've in part already answered, Kevin, that it's a construct initiated by a PR firm to manipulate people of South Africa and to actually cause war between the races. But what about the latter part of that question? Do you think it's an era that's now water under the bridge?
No, I don't. It's still being used. It wasn't only started by the English, it was started in cahoots with the Guptas and with Duduzane Zuma, who approached Victoria Geegan, I think her name is, and there the concept was forked out as a counter to the leaks about the Gupta leaks, etc., etc. It's used as political propaganda still. I think our red shirts are very active with white monopoly capital and so on. And it's very funny. And then they want their own monopoly right now. Eskom is a monopoly, which is collapsing. And you can think of others. Look at the energy problem. There's, again, you find all kinds of rumors about big-time corruption, about these power ships and so on. And then it's because white monopoly capital is against it, all that kind of nonsense. It's used as political propaganda in order to, shall we say, feather their own nests.
So we highlighted now the connections between the Guptas, the Zumas, which we colloquially named the Zuptas, when we realized how closely they were related, and the Bell Pottinger firm. Now, the same obviously goes both ways. Marinette Jordan wants to know how important are these connections, as in it is who you know for entrepreneurs in the case of your tycoons. And then she also wants to know whether entrepreneurship can be taught. You know, to what degree can it be taught, especially at varsity level?
I think it will be difficult to teach it. You can teach the environment in which you can succeed, but you have to have skills and a real drive to succeed in your field. very difficult to teach that. Some people are born with ambition and to stand on their own feet, as I said before, but some are not. Some would like to have a desk job, 9 to 5, and they're not entrepreneurs. So it's very difficult to teach it, but you can set the environment for it. Yeah, that's about it.
One name that I didn't see in your book of a Afrikaner tycoon, and one name now also highlighted by Noel Ramassar, is Michael Jordan. Is there a reason why you didn't add him to your book?
He is in the book, but
not as a main sort of.
Not as a main, but he might become that, because he's now into RAIN, the technology firm, and so on, and he's mentioned as having been with First Rand. He was there before, and he's now at Stellenbosch. He started his own company there. He's also a big wine farmer, so he's mentioned, but not at the stage where the others were at that time. He might become, yeah.
Windsor Harper also wants to know, how are these tycoons influencing the stability of the energy sector? It's quite a jump in topic, but I think it's related. It's important to those connections that Marinette was talking about. Those connections also dictate what the state are doing, what the rest of business are doing, and we also see that the world politics and the world themes are influencing a greener technology in South Africa relating to energy. And we also see that in the risk mitigating IPPs that Minister Gwedi Mantashe proclamated and tries to initiate, which made a disastrous turn in Parliament this week. So what do you think? Are they involved in that?
Yeah, I think they should be. The green energy is becoming the thing of the future. Whether it will soon be, that is another question, because right now, because of the money being spent on green energy, especially from the United States, paradoxically, oil prices and gas prices are going up, because the producers will probably become less, but the need for energy is still very big. Coal power plants. What do we do without coal power plants? Already in deep trouble if we don't have them. We can't switch to green energy very quickly. Wind power as well as solar power is not a constant source of energy. So yeah, it's a strange time to live in. We have an electricity crisis as we sit here, and it looks as it might become worse before it will get better. And it is really a threat to the whole South African economy. So it would be, I think, many minds should concentrate on how do we save our own energy crisis, and that, to my mind, the private sector should contribute in a big way. Whether the government wants that is another question.
Yeah, and journalists will definitely have a close look at what's going on there. There are a lot of questions about the ethics in making money. All sorts of different questions and themes, but in the end, it boils down to this. Shakespeare said that misery acquaints a man with strange bedfellows. But I'd argue that your book also highlights how money and profit acquaints man with even stranger bedfellows. One that was highlighted to me was Koos Bekker, who perhaps the most direct, you quote him, which I think was so revealing, saying, "I think recipes, like principles, are dangerous." Now, he's referring to recipes as in the recipe of conducting this business and think there's a recipe and just trying to duplicate it, recipes in that context. But the second word was the interesting one where he says, "I think recipes like principles are dangerous." Did you question him further about that sentence? And did he elaborate on that?
No, I did not question him further about that. I just quoted him.
You quoted him further saying that he's known for just saying when he's when he's challenged about something that either went wrong or someone disagreed with, or often, as did go with Naspers and Media24, is where he made decisions that ensured that one or other section imploded. He would just say it's a business decision and that be done with it.
That's right. That's what he does. Yes. The first thing that you mentioned, recipes. Yeah. He also made the remark that you don't learn from your successes; you learn from your failures. So you have to be prepared that you might fail, but that's the lesson you learn. And I don't think there is a recipe for an entrepreneur. No. You know that you must pick your market and go into it, and it demands lots of time, energy, sweat.
Well, I want to take that further because we're still talking about the ethics of the matter, right? So Koos was also the one who's at the head of Naspers when MultiChoice climbed into bed with the Guptas, there was a lot of questions about it, and one of their own publications had to write about it. You write how he threatened to kick out shareholder activist Theo Botha from a shareholder meeting just for asking tough questions. It's very clear also that there's no qualms about having deals or dealings with communist China. And it's again perhaps very polite to describe their questionable labor practices or no freedom of speech, or that the worth of a life is not a lot in China. So about the ethics, I want you to dive into the ethics of making money, because it's a question that our viewers are wondering about, and it's something that you do touch on lightly in your book, I think.
Yes. I think once you start with the question about luck, it's luck, of course, plays a big role, and I think Gary Player said to the person who watched him putty, who said, "This is very lucky," and he said, "The more I practice, the luckier I get." So yes, 10 cents, which he started in China, was of course also lucky. That it did turn out to be a huge investment, and this is still Naspers' biggest money spinner. It is huge. There's a huge market in China, and so there were big fighters in China. He lost a lot of money. I mean, Naspers went down from 100 rand a share to 12 rand a share. That's risk-taking, and sometimes risks come off, sometimes they don't, and entrepreneur knows that. Whether you know somebody, it's useful. I think Whitey Basson puts it very well when he discards the story about the Stellenbosch mafia. That's a total myth, of course. And he says, you know people, and sometimes you know who to phone to get some information about something that you want, a deal that you want to do, or something you want to buy or sell or whatever. It's useful to know people, naturally. But whether there's a concerned mafia effort at Stellenbosch, to tackle something, that's nonsense. These people differ very much from each other, and they compete with each other.
I think I'm going to again take you back to the ethics of the matter. It's a bit like shying away from, the Land Act and the Bantustan Acts and the Education Acts. We have to speak about this, like the tobacco question these days as well. I know that it perhaps didn't start out as a moral issue, but they are all the more investors with conscience, and they're making a business out of it now, like Theo Botha, who's an ethical, or pronounces as to be an ethical shareholder. And when these people ask questions about whether money making is also moral, or bring moral dilemmas, what would you say about the moral dilemmas of the matter?
Sure, it brings moral dilemmas. I think Johann Rupert was worried about the tobacco question, and that's why he moved into luxury products. I suppose even with luxury products, you could bring moral qualms, concerns. Yes, there are moral concerns, definitely. And, you have to investigate your own conscience then.
Yeah, and the problem with the conscience, it can go both ways, right? So the perception of what is right and wrong differs from person to person. I want you to tell me, what are you most proud of as one of the last things that we touch on in this book? It's quite a feat, even though we agree that it's narrow and that there's some context that one would have added, and that that it's not the entire picture of the entire tycoon sector in South Africa. It's a deep dive, a proper historical account, and there are many, many interesting facts. I've learned a lot from reading it. I think you've done well. What are you most proud of? I mean, you did say that you had 3 years of your life spending on this. It's quite a lot of time.
Well, the thing that I'm most proud of is that I actually wrote the book, because it was a very demanding task. It was difficult, and it could be regarded as maybe controversial in some circles. But I think I tried to give, as far as I'm concerned, a balanced and view of what Afrikaners did in this country. They weren't all saints, nor were they all devils. And there is some thought among, the Afrikaans language is under an onslaught, which I don't like. But yes, it was a very demanding task, and I'm very proud that I could do it.
Last question, Ebbe. The question again of white monopoly capital. In my investigations across SARS, the Gupta leaks, looking at Steinhoff, Eskom, Denel, state enterprises, and then private companies like Bain, the local private companies like spinning off from the VBS mutual bank situation, like in the insurance industry. I note that money these days don't have a color, and that white monopoly capital is a construct in the minds of politicians and used as a weapon. Because when they're ethical, the business people work together across all sectors, across all races to build good businesses. But when they're bad, they, again, across all sectors and across all races, they're pretty bad. Do you differ with me in that regard? What did you find in your book?
The one thing that I thought should be mentioned is that, the private sector, if you invest your money with the private sector, you have a choice whether you can put it there. As far as the state is concerned, you don't have a choice. You have to pay tax. If you don't pay your tax, they can grab it out of your bank account. There's no choice for you. And I think there's a very high moral obligation on the state to spend the money wisely. And what we have in South Africa is very concerning. Corruption is pervasive in the state now. It's kickbacks from tenderpreneurs. The latest, what shall we call it, stories about what's happening in the ANC, plundering the state-owned entities with, by the way, money paid by the taxpayer. And they demand what they call donations from the state-owned enterprises and so on. I would say, talk about immorality. That's taxpayers' money that you're taking back to the party. And the constant theme of the party being the most important institution in South Africa above the state. We hear it from the president himself. He calls himself a party animal. Well, that is not the oath that he swore when he became a member of parliament. He swore an oath to the Constitution, which is the highest law of the land, not the party. And that's, I'd be considered immoral.
Ebbe, thank you very much for joining. Your advice and your insights and your perspective is appreciated and interesting. And it's interesting also to describe and investigate these situations. I'm sure we will use your book in future as a historical work. To all our listeners, thank you so much for tuning in. We loved your questions. It was insightful and good to have you on board. And especially, lastly, to our Maverick Insiders, please remember that you're special for us, and thank you very much for your support. Good day.